The follow-up question to the nuclear power thing, and I really didn't want to tear into the nuclear power thing too much, but I understand it's a curiosity, and a lot of people talk about it because it's all over the internet. Why can't Europe do this, or why can't these countries, get their shit together and let's do nuclear power or something? And I gave you sort of my concerns, right, in that video about nuclear power, and it isn't the science behind it. I get the physics. It's the rest of it. It's the idea of, can people still maintain that? Like, just because you have found a group of people who can build something doesn't mean that the next group of people will be able to maintain it. I mean, like, that is a legitimate concern, especially when I see posts like, oh my God, we're all becoming idiocracy. Okay, so the solution to becoming idiocracy is build a bunch of nuclear reactors. Do you hear yourself when you think, right? I'm not being mean. I'm just saying that's the case. So somebody asked a really good question, and I thought it was a great question, and it's on a different platform, so there's no little bubble. And it was, what about building reactors in remote areas, like not countries necessarily, but just remote areas where there's uninhabited, there's nobody out there, and we can just build them out there and then just have the electricity come from them. Here's the problem, and I'm going to answer this question because it's a really good question. It's a question a lot of people ask, and this is what happens. To build virtually any large-scale nuclear reactor, the further, of course, with electricity, the further away you put the electricity production, the more it costs in electricity and amperage to push that through the lines and get it to where you want it to go. You can have this huge loss of electricity and energy, so you have to produce that much more, okay? To put it way out in the middle of nowhere, you have the cost of building it out in the middle of nowhere. One of two things happens. Either windshield time. What's windshield time, for those of you who don't know? That means guys like me driving trucks to the middle of nowhere every day for 30 years. So that's an enormous expense. Just the delivery portion of that is absolutely enormous. Then you have to have the guys out there. Now, if you want to have it uninhabited, to where you want to have like a minimum, let's say you want to have a minimum radius of something like 100 miles, you have kind of limited where you're going to put this now in almost any country in the world. Maybe up in like northern Siberia, you could get away with it. But once again, the costs to take materials out there to do all of that is enormous. Well, couldn't we just build places for guys to live like in North Dakota? Yes, and eventually towns will spring up. This is just a reality. It's how boomtowns started. It's what ends up happening. So you're going to end up with, eventually, if you haven't, especially on a huge project, you end up with people putting in grocery stores, and then they put in gas stations, and then they start putting in movie theaters, assuming people still go to the movies anymore. Then they start, and then there's a Walmart. And then there's, now we need to have apartments for people to live in who work in the job. Like, you understand what I'm saying? Like, this just, it escalates, and before you know it, it becomes a populated area. This is just reality. It's what ends up happening. So, yeah. So that's one thing. Now, let's assume for a second that you could do that again. You have to figure the costs on all of that. Now, I'm not going to use dollars because dollars are not a unit of measurement. You've heard me say this. So I'm going to have to use some other thing. So let's say that you had to pay for all of that in advance in a hard currency that you can't conjure from anything. There's one way to get it, and you have to burn energy to do it. And you could say, like, well, okay, so it's orange internet money or gold. Yeah, like physical gold. Because part of the reason that physical gold has the value that it does is by virtue of the price paid to pull it out of the ground. Because you got to pay somebody to pull it out of the ground, right? And if you have to pay them in gold, well, then now some of your profit's gone. So you have to spread the wealth around. Because if you don't spread the wealth around, they're eventually just going to steal it from you. This is just reality, okay? I mean, you kind of have to go full Fezziwig with people. So this is kind of how this stuff works. So you have the cost of building it. Then you have to have the cost of maintaining that. Again, the robots are not going to do all that stuff. This is this is where the hard physics come in. Okay, we could have robots and people operate them remotely. You still have to have people maintain it. If it has a moving part, it's going to need to be maintained, right? Okay, I mean, I don't know how to. I mean, I work on stuff all the time, and the more moving parts it has, especially the more moving parts it has, the less efficient it becomes. This is why turbines, for example, are used to produce electricity rather than V8 engines. V8 engines are among the least efficient way to create electricity because of how many moving parts are in the engines, as opposed to a turbine that just has a shaft and it spins. That's it, and a hot section. I mean, like there's not a lot to a turbine. Okay, that's why we use them. Okay. So I'm talking about like for a natural gas or a propane turbine. I'm not talking about like a wind turbine. Okay, so this all being the challenge, you have this enormous cost to build something like that out in the middle of nowhere. And then of course, what if there's a problem? There's nobody out there, and the idea is, well, the robots can. No, TARS and CASE are not. That is not a thing, okay? Cool though that would be, that's not a thing, okay? You're gonna have to have a human element, which means that someone has to go out there. And if it's 100 miles, okay, so even if somebody is running at 100 miles an hour to get out there, it's gonna take an hour. Oh, we could build a bullet train. Again, now you're adding even more cost and more time to do all of this. Like, do you see the problem? So, and then you have to figure, okay, so if the whole idea to do it was to do clean energy, so-called green energy, okay, how much diesel did you burn to build that? I mean, like, how much other energy did you burn to do that? Well, but the return is greater. Pending. Because it may or may not, right? I mean, especially trying to do something like that. So you have to factor all that stuff in, and what ends up happening usually is you're better off not even bothering building it in the first place. You're better off actually just making what you have way more efficient and working on that and it's sort of like diesel engines for semi-trucks. The goal is actually fuel. If you really want to have green energy, excuse me. If you really want to have sort of green semi-trucks, you don't want electric semi-trucks. They're horribly inefficient. You don't want any of these other crazy gimmicks. What you want is fuel mileage. That's what you actually want. You want a semi-truck getting 10 miles to the gallon consistently. If you really truly cared about the environment, that's what you want. Not all this other crap. Not this make Al Gore rich nonsense. Putting goat piss in your engine and stuff like that's. Like, dude, none of that. That's not going to do it. Okay. What you want is fuel mileage. You don't need a bunch of EGRs. You don't need a bunch of recirculate. You don't need any of that stuff. That just makes your engine more inefficient. You want efficiency, and you want as many miles to the gallon as you can possibly get. That's what you're after, is efficiency. Okay. This is just physics talking here. Okay. This is hard physics talking. That's what you're after, is efficiency, not gimmicks. Remember, there is unfortunately not a lot of money in solving problems, but boy, there's a lot of money in pretending to solve problems, right? Like Alzheimer's, medications and so forth, that don't actually work. There's lots of money in pretending to solve a problem. Theranos comes to mind too. There's all and any one of the 30 under 30 Forbes people, except they're all in jail now. I mean, there's lots of money in pretending to solve a problem and giving the illusion of solving a problem. There is no money in actually solving the problem in many cases. There's usually just, hey, thanks, really good work. That's super duper awesome. And, now you can retire and go do other stuff. Retire, or in other words, live life on your terms. I'll use it that way. Hope that helps.